Morning, everyone. So first and foremost, I hope everyone is safe and well, and obviously maintaining self-isolation. So my background is almost 20 years of working predominantly for blue chip private sector companies. And more recently, I've started my own sort of consultancy. My background is predominantly data, which Yusuf has alluded to. So getting involved in data capture, how to then store the data, how to then utilize that data, and ultimately using data to improve and enhance your business. And the bottom line is kind of where I support a lot of businesses. So I've got my website set up, pulsemediagroup.co.uk. Got a lot of free resources on there as well. So a lot of topics are covered: customer lifecycle, what is data, what is insight. So it's quite business focused, but there is quite a few free resources on there as well. Feel free to drop me an email at any time at info@pulsemediagroup.co.uk, and also appreciate if you follow me on Pulse Media Group on Twitter. The tag is at Pulse Media Group. So within kind of that kind of history, I've recently become a bit more of a GDPR focused practitioner. So utilizing the kind of legal side of GDPR, but actually manifesting and executing it for multiple businesses across the board. So again, that's something which hopefully we're going to cover a lot of that on this particular session. But feel free to drop me a line on any of those channels after this webinar. So it is a legal topic, so I can't run away from the fact that GDPR is very much it's regulation, so we are going to have to tackle jargon. There's kind of no way around it, unfortunately. We're then going to move on to the actual impact, and what I mean by impact is give you a few scenarios where GDPR could be impactful. Action is where we actually move into more specific scenarios, which hopefully will be relevant to you and your businesses. And then we'll have a kind of Q&A session towards the end where we can tackle some questions, and hopefully we'll be able to give you some answers. So the sort of first session is going to be on jargon. There isn't a kind of keyboard error here. It really is, to emphasize that GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it's a regulation. It's a regulation. We can't sort of avoid it. It's kind of the law. And just in terms of a bit of background in terms of the history, and some of you might be aware of this, of these sort of terminologies. It's not a problem if you're not. Essentially, the historical timeline of GDPR began in 1998 through the Data Protection Act. So individuals had a legal right to control information about themselves. Please note that this was a directive, not a regulation. So it was almost optional for businesses to sort of implement this. It was, look, we're advising, we're directing you as a business to make sure you implement this this law. That then followed. That was then followed by the Privacy and Electronic Communications regulations, and this actually became more of a regulation where it became unlawful to transmit automated recorded messages for direct marketing purposes without consent or subscriber. But again, it's linked to automated recorded messages. So this PIP and all these illegal spam calls we get, they actually got outlawed in 2003. So I think what that tells us is governance can be an issue, but as I'll come on to shortly, you still want to stay, both legally and also financially, you want to stay safe of the law. So in 2018, so time flies, it's already been 2 years since GDPR came out, and I think from my personal recollection, probably around 2017, everyone was talking about doom and gloom. Everyone was saying it's the end of the world. There was a lot of extreme views going on. But when 2018 came, it did seem to things seemed to calm down, certainly in the media. Although now, interestingly, with the pandemic, you might have heard GDPR crop up again, because a lot of companies, including the NHS, are looking into tracking where you go, purely from a from a health purpose perspective. But you can imagine there will be some speculative businesses who are looking into it as an opportunity to acquire data and commercialize it, unfortunately. So GDPR is bizarrely coming back in the media again, albeit very low key. There's clearly bigger issues, but it has sort of crept back in. And like I've mentioned there, it's an actual evolution of the DPA in 1998, and this is where the law is now spelling out in a bit more clearer fashion what we can and cannot do. So just coming back on what I've already mentioned, the key difference between DPA and GDPR is the former was a directive, so it was up to the relevant EU member state to decide on how to achieve that, whereas GDPR is actually a regulation, so it's a legally binding set of rules. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, we've just gone through Brexit. We will be leaving the EU pretty soon. Physically, so formally the process has started. However, because we deal with the EU, and it's economically that figure is disputable at this moment in time, but we have circa 70 billion pounds of trade with the EU, and that's just us, that's the UK. There's other countries as well, like the US, they also trade with the EU. So there's major economies of the world who deal with the EU, and this is a regulation within the EU. So EU companies cannot deal with another company who does not adhere to GDPR. So it kind of makes sense where, although we are, let's say we're not part of the EU now, from the 15th of April. However, because we still trade with the EU, what the government has done is we've actually enacted a law so that it kind of applies to us as well. So all businesses within the UK have to adhere to this regulation. So there's no two ways around it. We are all, as business owners, as employees for businesses, we all must adhere to this regulation. So coming on to the worst case scenario, legally, if you flout the law, you get punished, and it's a pretty hefty fine. So, if you're, let's say you're kind of turning over, £1 million, that's like £40,000 of your turnover, and it says global. If you're just UK based, and your turnover is £1 million, it's still £1 million. That is your global turnover. If you have multiple sites across the world who are generating, let's say £10 million, then obviously the percentage fine creeps up, and it's your global turnover. So it doesn't matter what you're turning over in the UK. If you've got sites across the world, it's your global turnover that will be impacted. It's kind of tiered. So if the 4% goes over 20 million euros, the minimum you'll be charged or fined will be 20 million euros. There have been cases, some big businesses have actually already fallen foul of it. Facebook is a classic one, which they're always kind of falling foul of the law. And GDPR, you'll have not recently, but over the last couple of years, even they've changed the way they monitor and collate their data. So this is something which is pretty inescapable. Even if you're thinking, well, in terms of punishment, in terms of fines, let's say 10% of businesses who fall foul of the law, will get fined. You've got to really weigh up, the cost of implementing versus getting a fine. So, are you willing to take that risk? Are you, willing to roll the dice and say, we're just going to do business as usual? The last thing you really want is, especially if you're a startup, to be going through a process of, going through all the pain and effort of getting something set up, and then, potentially getting fined, getting a bad reputation, and the kind of baggage that would come as a result of that. So it really is a tough decision. But my advice would be err on the side of caution and always just adhere to the kind of regulation. So this is where I've got to mention certain terms. This is the most boring section, by the way, so it will pick up after this. Within GDPR, you will come across terms like personal data, data controller. So personal data really, excuse me, is any information that relates to an identified or identifiable natural person. So the way I look at it is the personal data is your customer, and the data controller is you, the business. Identifiable encompasses attributes such as name, location. So, for example, Jawad Batty Blackburn, an ID number, national insurance number, or an online identifier. So it could be a cookie, it could be an IP address. So if you are monitoring or measuring any of these attributes, immediately you are affected by GDPR. Data controller, like I've mentioned, is a person, business, who determines the purpose and means of processing that personal data. So in a nutshell, the personal data has come on into your business somehow, and we'll go on to it in a lot more detail in terms of the impact. But now you, as a business owner, as a business representative, you need to determine why have you captured that data and what you're going to do with it. So that's kind of in a nutshell what personal data and data control means. So then we go on to the processing side of things. So if you look at, and I will kind of visualize it in more of a diagram a bit later, but you can almost break down data processing into various stages. So there's the collection and recording potentially of that data, your storage of that data, dissemination of that data, and the destruction of that data. The controller is responsible for applying the 6 principles, which I'll come on to, I think, in the next slide, against each of these data touchpoints. Consent, massive point within GDPR. So the data subject, so your customer, has to freely, specifically make an informed and has to make an informed indication by statement or action signifying agreement to the processing of their personal data. So I, as a customer, am happy for Enterprise for All to collect, record, store, disseminate, and destroy my data in a particular fashion, and I give them that in writing or affirmative action. which again I'll kind of come on to, but loosely, affirmative action could be, if you've heard of double opt-in, where a customer will provide the details, and they'll click submit. They'll then receive an email to say, are you sure you want to be a part of this process? You then click the link and it says, thank you, you've now affirmed, you're now part of this process. Potentially you will now receive this PDF that you were interested in downloading, but ultimately there's a clear agreement now that we can do X, Y, Z with your data. Just doing a quick check if everyone can still hear me okay. No issues. I think I'm just having a look on the chat. Good. So in terms of the 6 principles now, I'm going to bore you to death with these 6 principles. I do apologize in advance, but honestly, if by the end of this session you know at least a couple of these off by heart, you'll walk out.
Howard, can
Yes.
I just interrupt?
Yes.
Phil has raised his hand. Can I just see what he...
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go for it.
Phil? Hello, Phil?
I've not bored him to death already, have I?
No, he might be... Phil, you got a question?
I think we've lost him, have we? Has he gone offline?
Oh, okay. No,
I think we've
okay,
lost.
sorry,
He might have had a connection issue. Yeah, we can hopefully if he connects back, we can sort of do that before the kind of interlude. So in terms of the 6 principles, right? So I'm only going to verbally go through these once, but you will see these crop up multiple times. You've got to be fair, lawful, and transparent. So you as a business, just embed in your minds when you're thinking about capturing data, be fair, lawful, and transparent. Collect that data for a specified, explicit purpose. So, and I will go on to a bit more specific examples, but let's say you want to, sell something to a customer. And the trigger point for selling is you'll have a lovely article which people can download, but upon them submitting the information, you are saying, right, if you click submit, my business is going to get in touch with you to sell you, a new telecom system, or I'm going to sell you a course. A training course, for example. Point 3, obtain data that is adequate, relevant, and not excessive. So I don't need to ask your marital status. I don't need to ask how many kids you've got. I don't need to ask, do you own or rent your house, if all I want to do is sell your business a new telephone system. I don't need all that information. So again, we have to start thinking about, in terms of why are we collecting this information and is it relevant? Point 4, don't lose data, break it, damage it, or put it in a physically unsafe environment. So data storage, when you actually store that data, is it, in a notepad, which you're going to take with you, hopefully sooner than later when we're back on the train. You're going to just leave it on the train and fall asleep, and people around you can potentially have a quick nosy, or are you going to actually store it in a database system which is encrypted, it's secure, it's backed up? You are responsible for this. So you can't be, you can't even theoretically have it on a Excel spreadsheet on your laptop, which you then share with other people. So your work laptop might double up as your personal laptop. And you might go on holiday, you might ring your grandma, your uncle, your auntie, and you might share your laptop, and the next day you find it's in someone's room, and they'll be doing other stuff with it, not like that, but online gaming maybe, and potentially you've exposed yourself and your customers' data. So it's a mindset thing as well, going on as well. Only keep identifiable data, only keep your customer data as long as is necessary. So this is quite important, because I think a lot of us, and certainly a lot of the businesses that I've both worked for and consulted for them, there's almost like a hoarding mentality where, no, we don't want to sort of delete that data. We don't want to get rid of that data. Well, I'm sorry, you're going to have to almost set some parameters that says, once a customer, for example, has not transacted, or they haven't communicated with us either by email or telephone for, let's say, a couple of years, that's our kind of parameter, and we're going to set that in stone. And once a customer passes that duration, we're going to physically delete all identifiable data for that customer from our database system. It's gone. That ensures the relevance of your customer data, because if a customer's fallen out of love with your business for whatever reason, it's their prerogative, it's their right to say, I don't really want to be connected or linked with this business anymore. And they might not articulate that. So now the onus is on the business to actually define that and potentially delete that data. And the last kind of principle is you've got to keep your data accurate and where necessary up to date. So providing your customer is still engaging, transacting, you've got to keep your data accurate. Now, this is actually where you could take the GDPR from a potential pain into an opportunity. You are allowed to maybe contact your customer to say, we've got this information about you. Can you just double check it's still kind of up to date? You sometimes get this if you're logging into Google Analytics, or where you just reminded is your telephone number, is your contact mobile number still up to date? So you are constantly reminded, and that's actually allowed. And the benefit of this is your data goes through a cleansing exercise. I've been in lots of businesses, particularly B2C, particularly business to consumer, where depending on the kind of demographic, the consumer will constantly change their email address, which if you're trying to market and campaign and send a newsletter, send information to a customer, and you do it through email because it's cost effective, having that email address up to date and relevant is actually beneficial to you. So this is part of GDPR. This is almost like a little alarm clock for you to say, maybe after every 3 months, just go through a bit of a cleansing exercise and just let your customer know that, as part of GDPR, we want to keep our data accurate. Can you just confirm X, Y, Z? That'll save you the hassle of getting loads of bounced emails and you're a low kind of response conversion rate. So this is where you could potentially look at some of the pain elements as an opportunity. Just have a look at time. I think we're doing okay. So in terms of direct marketing, so this is where we as a business, and this applies to any kind of business, whether you're a charity, political party, regardless of who you are. Sorry, includes any non-businesses as well. Is how you communicate to your end customer, to your end consumer. So, you know, by default, every time you you sort of communicate to your customer, in the back of your head, you know, GDPR is kind of relevant. So, you know, in terms of jargon, that kind of summarizes all the, I wouldn't say all, but the key points that are going to be relevant to you from day one, from now, and you know, you just probably need to start getting familiar with that kind of terminology and that kind of mindset. I don't know if we want a quick break or we crack on through, Yusuf. Happy to sort of keep going. Can everyone still hear me? Just double check. Can anyone just put on the chat if they can still hear me? Sorry, I might have been waffling for. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Seda. Great. Thank you. Do we want a quick break or shall I crack on through? Thank you, Sam. I'll take whatever the first response is. Perfect. Okay. So now we're getting, this is where hopefully it gets a bit more interesting and sort of exciting. So finance and customer services. So if we look at a business, and I'm going to, you know, apologies if this is overly, oh, sorry, Sam wants a quick break. I've just spotted. Shall we have a quick 5, if that's okay? And then I'll crack on with the impact. So if it's 10:43, if we resume about 48, if that's okay. No problem. So if anyone's got any quick questions on those who don't need a break, anyone's got any quick questions on what we've covered so far, happy to take them now. Hi, Yusuf. We're just having a quick break.
Yeah, that's good. That's
I'm
good.
just
I had to sort something out, but
no problem. And I've just asked.
We can have a look at the chats and the question and answers and see. And that's Sadi can hear us. Yeah,
I think
break.
I think
it is just that's good.
I think I'm not necessarily expecting any question from the jargon, but it is you're perfectly entitled to think of that as boring. It really, you know, I find a lot of jargon, a lot of definitions and you know, legal side of things quite boring. But you know, you've got to appreciate we do kind of have to unfortunately cover it because, you know, these are terminologies which you know, certainly you as a business owner or a business representative, you might be asked, you know, what are you doing about our personal data? Who's the data controller? So, you know, at least you know, you can come back and say, well, you know, I'm the data controller and this is kind of how we process your data. So it's one of those where jargon's always a controversial subject. No, that's absolutely.
Tracy
has.
Yes, there's a question there for you. I have a face-to-face consultation regarding skin, etc. Does I assume the cleansing, etc. applies to this as I keep records?
Okay, so here, I'm going to make an assumption you're a B2C, so you're a business who consults with consumers of your skin service, and as a result of that, you store and you record that customer information, be it the name, be it their address, what service they took, and how much they paid, etc. The quick answer is yes. It does apply to you as well. Questions are coming in now. Sorry. And I think it's one of those where just to close off the point, I think we're gonna go through the impact and action. So hopefully, it's going to guide you with a few pointers as we go along. I think anything that's kind of outstanding, if we maybe cover it specifically in the Q&A, or equally if there's any quick answers that are needed, like I said, drop me an email. It's kind of
so what we could open it up at the end, some of the things people want to ask.
Yes, in the Q&A section.
Yeah, we can open
Agree.
up the videos so people can, if they're happy to share unmute sound, then they can actually directly ask you a question, maybe respond that way as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kiara has asked a question as well. Any CRM systems segregate the data with permissions? So we're gonna come on to we're gonna potentially come on to an example shortly, Kiara, where the key thing is the quick answer is there's no one CRM system which is kind of totally GDPR compliant. They will say a CRM system like Salesforce, for example, they will have elements of GDPR built in, such as a flag that says, are you opted in, opted out, a date when someone has opted in, opted out, for example. So who has consented, you will have that. However, the key thing is on your front end, whether it's how you capture that data is going to be crucial. So as long as you've been quite clear with your customer that you are capturing their data for this purpose, and you capture when they've actually opted into that, and secondly, you give them the ability to come back to you and be able to opt out freely, then you could, that could be a way for you to do that. However, in terms of, we as a consultancy, we've actually helped a business, and we actually worked with Forbes solicitors as well. So we built, call it a preference center, where a customer could freely, so they opted in when they came onto the website, and then they had a place where they could opt out, they could change their settings, and we actually went above and beyond and worked with Forbes to almost authenticate this, so that that business could say safely, look, they actually turned it into a USP where they said, we've kind of collaborated with Pulse Media Group, but also Forbes solicitors have kind of signed off, this process. So we are legit, we are kosher, and it just gives that customer a bit more peace of mind. So apologies if that doesn't kind of answer. It's a little bit difficult through chat to kind of do it. And yeah, Rabia said we can do the Q&A a bit later. So I think it's 51. So we'll kind of crack on for now, if that's okay, guys.
Yeah.
So now we're going to get into a bit more exciting stuff. So what is the impact of GDPR? So we've gone through all the kind of boring jargon. So something which I kind of started. talking about before the break. So if we, and I have to kind of, because there's no one size fits all businesses, if we loosely say within a business you've got customer service, you've got finance, you've got sales, and you've got marketing. Yes, you've got other functions like IT, but if we loosely say there's kind of 4 or 5 critical functions, finance are what I deem to be a function which will send you an invoice statement, the billing side of things. That's essential. They're not impacted. Customer service, you ring up a customer service line, your issue isn't dealt with, they come back to you via email or telephone to resolve that issue. They're not impacted. This, in kind of my mind, if you are a sales focused business or a marketing focused business or both, you're impacted by GDPR. So apologies for the kind of poor graphics, but PowerPoint is kind of limited to what PowerPoint could offer. So the kind of rectangle shape is your website, and the kind of ambiguous face is someone about to kind of come onto your website. So I fancy having a look at your service, and I'm about to sort of come onto your website. So once I've landed on your website, straight away, my IP address, my dwell time, my entry page, other Google stuff, cookies, potentially could be captured. So if, let's say we all use Google Analytics, which is, by default, it's probably the most commonly used website analytics packaged platform tool. Within that, you've already got dwell time, entry page. You are actually now, if we go back to the Jargon and we look at personal data, if you recollect, one of the points of what is identifiable was an online identifier. So a cookie, an IP address, a location. So whether we like it or not, and I know this will potentially sound quite scary, we are actually capturing that information. Whether we do anything with it or not, it doesn't matter. We've captured that information. We could do something with that information. We might not, like I said, but we've gone through it and we potentially could. What will then compound matters further and maybe present a case against us is if George Clooney was to visit one of our websites. In addition to the Google Analytics stuff, he fills out a form and registers to be contacted about a particular product or service. What you then get is you have a scenario where you've kind of mixed the online, call it the virtual stuff, with a physical, tangible person now. So when George Clooney has registered at so it's 10:55, and you happen to have on your Google Analytics a visitor at 10:55 on that particular page, bingo, it's George Clooney. It's that person, 100% identifiable, and that's where you've literally got no escape from being accountable for GDPR. And I do want to kind of stress, some businesses, and certainly at least one that I've worked with, have actually looked at GDPR as an opportunity, as a USP. Your customer, particularly with what's going on in today's environment, sadly, there's a lot of doom and gloom. We are after trust. We are after building loyalty and sticking with brands who we feel are empathetic towards us. If you pride yourself on GDPR and putting the customer at the forefront of your business, that loyalty is potentially going to be priceless. So, let's kind of, from a mindset perspective, let's change it from a, oh God, I'm going to be pulled over by the police, to hang on, let's just rethink our strategy. Our email, for example, response rates are poor anyway. If you only have a list of people who have 100% opted in, consented, you're going to find they're more responsive to a big wider list of people who, they might have opted in about 3 years ago. They've got no idea who or what you are now. And lo and behold, they don't respond. What you're going to find is your response rate goes up. So if you use something like MailChimp, for example, they actually, they relay that information back to you. But if you condense and make your list a lot more concise, your response rate goes up, and that will affect things like deliverability. That will affect things like conversion. It'll enhance your credentials with that mail provider. So there's a lot of benefits that can be achieved. So just kind of, a quick note to kind of bear that in mind. So going back to, so once you've got that person registered, so what can you do potentially? So let's say you've got a registration form, and it's basically a sign-up form for your product or service. If we go to consent, so another reminder. So this is data that so the customer freely, specifically, unambiguously indicates by affirmative action that they're happy for you to process their data. And at this stage, it's something I purposely missed out in the jargon. But the reason I'm mentioning it in the impact is, depending on whether you're a B2C or B2B company, there's a subtle difference in terms of how you can capture that customer's data, how you can demonstrate consent. If you're a B2C, the best methodology I would recommend is for you to have a clear, explicit sign-up form, which says we're going to do X, Y, Z with your data, and then have an email that goes to that customer to confirm they've opted into this service or product, and then they have to click a link to reconfirm. That's called double opt-in. For a B2B, if you only deal with businesses, you can actually have an opt-out regime. And I'm going to go into a B2B example in a little bit more depth. So if we revisit the data capture form we looked at, in the bottom right, you should see an opt-out example. So for example, you might put here, by submitting this registration form, you indicate your consent to receiving email marketing messages from us. If you do not want to receive such messages, tick here. So it's an opt-out. An opt-in is where they can't, you can't capture that data unless they've ticked the box and then click submit. An opt-in, an opt-out is where they can actually fill out that information, click sign up, and they've opted in. However, if they place a tick in the box that says we want to opt out, and then they click sign up, they just get whatever PDF or particular information they wanted. You can't then contact them because they've opted out. So there's a subtle difference between B2B, which I would heavily recommend is an opt-in, double opt-in process, compared to B2B, which is just an opt-out process. So coming back, so I think I've, just a quick recap, sort of in terms of the sort of content. Let's just always, whenever you have a process, put your customer hat on, and almost, when you have an opt-in section, when you have a data capture, a data recording section, just be really, clear with that customer what they're kind of potentially signing up for. You will inevitably find, some customers who might have normally signed up for such a thing will not sign up. However, I guarantee the quality of data capture will increase, because there's a massive difference between myself and, let's say, Yusuf. Let's say I've 100% opted in, whereas Yusuf, has let's call it the traditional method, where we didn't have a robust system, and he's opted into something. He's got no idea what he signed up for. All he knows is, he wanted to play Candy Crush or whatever, and he's kind of click sign up. He's got no idea what he's getting. He's going to get loads of emails, and he's probably going to put them as spam, report them as spam, unsubscribe. He's not going to engage, he's not going to respond. Whereas, let's say I want to play Candy Crush as well, and there's a registration box and it's saying, to go to the next screen, you will be contacted by our business for other services, other products. Please can you kind of tick the box and then click proceed. There's half of me which might think, well, no, I'm not interested. There's half that says, yeah, I'm actually getting a really good service here. They've been quite transparent with me. I do want to learn more about the other services, other products. So this is where, a combination of you having a really good service anyway, coupled with you being really transparent with your customer, I think is going to create a greater bond between the two entities.
Joed, can I just interrupt?
Yes.
Tracy has raised her hand. It might be a question. Let me just see what Tracy wants to ask.
Of course, yeah.
If I can. Tracy, can you hear Tracy? Hello?
She's put it was accidental.
Okay, no worries. Okay, continue.
Yeah, sorry. No problems. No problem. So, in terms of the sort of data touch points, so going back to the kind of jargon section, and where I mentioned about the kind of process of collection, recording, storage, dissemination, destruction. So I'm just going to give some kind of basic examples, and then we'll go into more specific cases and examples in the sort of action section. So in terms of the data touch points, and it's a conscious decision to make it a kind of ever a never-ending cycle. The process is continuous. It doesn't actually end. So your data touch point now, whether it's a website, whether it's a CRM system, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's a customer satisfaction system, if you are collecting and recording personal data, you need to be wary. You need to be conscious of this. The only scenario where you're not going to be impacted is, and without kind of belittling GDPR, is if you've got a really great photographic memory, and you meet someone and at an event, and you kind of you take down their number, all about the business, their email address, their phone number potentially. So your data capture system is you. That's kind of and I'll be the first to say, my memory is a bit of a sieve. So I think we all, in one form or another, will be actually collecting or recording some information about the customer. So once you've collected that information, you move on to the storage section, storage stage. So this is where things like encryption backups, your data warehouse or your CRM system. If you're using Salesforce, for example, if you're big enough, if you're, you can afford the cost, which I can't. But if you're massive and you can pay for something like that, they do have certain rules and regulations. So I think coming back to, apologies if it was Kiara or Tracy who asked the question. About is there a bespoke CRM system who kind of caters. This is where at the storage stage you might be able to contractually put the data controller aspect of storage onto the CRM system. But again, you need to be really tight in terms of making sure you stipulate that with them, that look, we're holding you responsible, under this regulation. Get it checked off a solicitor, and then proceed. But only in that circumstance would I say you can actually, and in the nicest possible way, you can potentially take your eyes off that stage of the cycle. Normally, your CRM, your data warehouse could be an Access, Microsoft Access. It could be MySQL. And depending on how you're hosting that database, where you're hosting it, you're responsible for it. So this is something you need to be wary of. And going back to the Excel example, it might just be one massive Excel spreadsheet, but it's on your laptop, so you're responsible for the storage. Have you password protected your laptop? Do you make a backup of your data, of your information? I.e., do you put it onto Dropbox or the cloud somewhere? And again, are you covered if there's a data breach? You need to be wary of things like that. So, you are responsible for that. Dissemination is, simply what do you do with that information? So you've collected it, you've stored it. What are you going to do with that information? Are you going to send out SMS? Are you going to email? Are you going to do a small telesales campaign? Again, there's certain rules and regulations you need to adhere to kind of be in accordance with GDPR. So I am going to go through at least one specific example for collection, storage, and dissemination shortly. And then the last point, destruction. So the reason why there's a question mark is my business will have a different definition of when a customer becomes an inactive or becomes disinterested to your business. So for that reason, it's questionable. Someone might have, if you're in fast fashion, for example, your customer could shop with you one day and they're off to the another competitor another day. So your customer life period, your lifetime duration is 3 months. So once that 3 months has elapsed, theoretically, you've got to delete that data because they haven't come back to you within that 3 month cycle. So, another business might have, they might have a service which is renewed every 2 years. So for that customer, every 2 years is an active customer, and to become inactive, they've almost got to reach 4 years since they've been a customer of yours. So they've not renewed. If they'd renewed, they would still be a customer after 4 years because it's every 2 years. So after 4 years of that person being your customer, they then become inactive. So this is how wide the gulf could theoretically be. So that's why it really is quite open in terms of what duration you set. So we're coming on to just checking on time. So we're still doing okay in terms of time. So we're going to now go into some specific example. So again, I'll do a really quick. I think we still should be okay to keep going. We don't need another break, I think. I'll take the first answer on chat. And then I'll let Yusuf monitor it. I'm going to take silence as just go for it. So we'll crack on. So in terms of what do we need to do, right? Thanks, Sam. So if there's, apart from the 6 principles, which we're going to go on to, you're going to see a lot of that now coming up. So at the end of this, I want you to know at least 2 of the 6 principles off by heart. And one of the key takeaway points I want you to have when you finish this session is this kind of this slogan, privacy by design. So in everything you do for your business, and this isn't overkill, honestly, have privacy by design. So, for example, if I'm creating a website page, and I'm going to go into sort of specific examples, but if I'm creating a website page, having the back of my mind, how am I preserving or protecting the privacy of my customer? If I'm creating an email campaign, how do I keep the privacy of my customer, at the forefront? So I'm going to go into kind of specific examples, but just, a mindset thing again, a behavioral change in the way you deal with your day-to-day activities. Just have privacy by design in the back of your head. Quick recap, 6 principles. I'm not going to repeat them all, but we're gonna go into the nitty-gritty of this. So if you recollect, so this is where now we're going to mash together that life cycle diagram that I showed a bit earlier. Just go back to it, with specific examples of overlaying 6 principles. So we're going to mash the 2 together. So we're going to look at 4 different examples of how to apply the 6 principles. And again, I can't emphasize enough where, one size does not fit all, unfortunately. And all I can do in this session is really give you an outline, a guidance that hopefully at the end of it, you'll be in a better position to say, I think, it's kind of triggered a certain way of thinking for me to think, right, okay, I need to think this way about my next telesales campaign, my next email campaign, how I store my data, how I acquire my data. So that's kind of, just a massive point to kind of point out. If you're sitting there and you go through these points and you're thinking, none of my points have been covered, it is really difficult because SMEs by their nature are unique. We have to fight and we have to kind of create our own USPs to establish ourselves in the market. So you've potentially got 2 million scenarios here, but I'm going to try my best to kind of guide you through 4 different scenarios, which hopefully you can take certain aspects from now and actually implement them into your business. So the first scenario is a third-party data provider. So I have never worked for a business that hasn't, to a certain extent, paid a data broker to buy a list to kind of generate a kind of contactable database of customers. And it works in a couple of ways, really. You can almost kind of summarize it in a couple of ways. If you are a startup and you've got no customer base, that could be one scenario where you approach a data broker and you say, hello, Mr. or Mrs. Data Broker. I need a list of 10,000 people who live in the northwest, have got a car, etc. Because I want to kind of target them with my windscreen polish, windscreen cleaner product. So this is what, the second scenario is for existing businesses who've got a little bit of money to kind of spend on marketing, and they want to penetrate a new market. So they've currently got a massive base of hospitality customers, and they want to now penetrate and go into the retail space, for example. So they will say to the data broker, look, I want a list of retailers. So the 6 principles again apply. I'll tell you why. So point 1, be fair, lawful and transparent. So it's got to be collected for a specified explicit purpose. Article 14 of GDPR, the information to be provided where the personal data has not been obtained from the data subject. So you've actually bypassed the customer and you've gone to a data broker. There's a prescriptive link, which I've actually got here. You can click it in the slide, or I can potentially put it in the Q&A, or Yusuf will kind of share out the kind of link later. But there's actually a list which defines exactly what you kind of need to do if you are using a data broker. But in summary, because we don't have several hours to kind of go through each and every one of these points, you need to requalify any bought-in data. So if you've bought in that data, you will need to either go through that list and say, have you definitely consented to this? Are you definitely happy for me to sell you this windscreen cleaner? Or shift the onus on the data provider to have this in place and ensure there is a source tag for you to audit if need be. So what this means is, let's say you've got, let's say you get an Excel sheet off your data provider, and you've got your name, email address of that customer, but then you've got another column that says, where did that data provider acquire that information from? And it might be the Auto Trader magazine, online magazine, and they opted in on this particular date. So you've almost got a bit of an audit history, and the data broker signs over to you that all of this information is legit. They definitely are interested in windscreen products. So as a result of that, you can now email, telesales, whatever, that particular list. In terms of the other points, going back to the 6 principles, obtain data that is adequate, relevant, and not excessive. So for example, let's again put yourself into the B2B, and sincere apologies, it is more, I've geared this a little bit more towards the B2B, but honestly you can adapt to B2C. So for example, if you've acquired a list, if you're a business-to-business company, and you've acquired a list that sort of gives you your retailers, potential retailers that you want to target, and you've got their employee band. So let's say you're a telecoms company, you're selling telephones, and let's say that retailer has got 5 employees. Do I really need to know what that turnover is for that business? Do I really need to know that particular company is turning over X thousands or millions per annum, when all I really need to know is how many employees they've got, so I can tell them a fixed number of telephone handsets. So just be thinking about, is it adequate, is it relevant, and don't be excessive. Coming to the kind of consumer space, coming to the example of if you've got a skin service, a health and beauty service, you might be it might be a particular demographic, it might be a particular area, it might be a particular income band, but then do you really need to know how many other people live in that household? Do you really need to know if they've got children? Is that really necessary? So again, limit it to what is adequate, relevant, and not excessive. Don't lose that data. So once you've acquired that information, and normally it's done over encrypted FTP, receive that information. Don't get it, even if it's by email. Make sure it's kind of zipped up, it's password protected, and then there's a follow-up email with the password potentially, so that someone can't hack into that particular email. And then once you've extracted that information, make sure it's kind of removed from your email, and you kind of delete it from your trash. And similarly from your FTP, you physically remove it. And then where you actually store that data, it's kept in a secure environment and there's sufficient firewall so someone can't sort of hack into it. And only keep it as long as necessary. So, that customer isn't your, that prospect, call them, isn't your customer. And let's say out of that list, 10% do actually become a customer, they convert, and they become a normal customer, in which case they'll move on to the next kind of stage. But for the other 90%, they haven't converted, and it's been a few weeks now. In the back of their heads, they only felt they were being targeted for a specific campaign, and it's no longer applicable. So as far as they're concerned, you shouldn't have their data. So you've got to really think about potentially deleting it and making sure you don't leave any trace of that file on your systems. So keeping that example of 10% of that list, or you've now stored that data because they've now become a customer. So whichever way you look at it, we're talking about customers now. So again, regardless of whether you're a B2B or a B2C, that person or business is now your customer. Again, 6 principles, just to kind of summarize, and then we'll go into specific cases of those. So again, don't lose the data. So you've got a database system, whether it's hosted on the cloud, whether it's hosted on your laptop. Is it as secure as possible? Is that database on your laptop encrypted? Have you backed it up? Is it, if for example, even at home, we're all, potentially we're all working from home. When you go downstairs to make your lunch, or you've got to look after your kids, you've got to go through some of the kind of coursework or whatever. When you leave your laptop, do you ensure it's locked? So I know it sounds quite basic, but if you've got data on your laptop, you need to protect it. You are liable for it. You are responsible for it. If you keep, data on a USB stick, again, do you lock it up? This sounds potentially quite silly, but do you put it in a tin and you lock it up, and you keep the key safe? You've got to be really protective of that data. Only keep identifiable data as long as necessary. So again, once a customer is 3 years inactive, it honestly varies. A crude way to look at it is, what is the frequency of your customer coming back to you? So do they come back to you every month, every year, every 2 years, and just double it? As a crude example, you're going to get subtle changes within that. So for example, you might have, in terms of your buying process, the decision-making process takes a little bit longer than the transactional stage. So you've got to honestly just make a judgment call. But if you've got a list of data on your laptop of people who you haven't been in touch with for 3 years, let's say, and they haven't transacted, they haven't responded to any of your emails, are they still relevant? In which case, you need to make a tough decision on that. And then the third point, coming back to where I kind of mentioned, you can potentially use this as an opportunity. Is your data accurate? So, if your customer has moved address and you've got an old address, it's going to actually be in your benefit, particularly if you're sending out lots of posts, or you don't want any gonaways. You don't, if you're printing a brochure, for example, or a catalogue, and you're physically sending something out, it could cost you a lot of money. So this is where, if you've got a really accurate data set and it's up to date, you're actually going to be a lot more efficient from that perspective. So, if you do have inaccurate data, it's got to be rectified or erased. So, one example could be, sadly, if someone is deceased, there's no way that customer should be on your records. The only instance where it could be is, for example, if that customer who was sadly expired had a large sort of credit balance, and they were, I don't know, they could have been a catalogue customer, and they dealt with credit a lot, and they left a large balance. Until that estate has been resolved, and let's say they left £1,000 in credit, you will have to kind of hang on to that until you've kind of cleared it with the estate, and any kind of will has been executed, etc. So there are exceptions to every single point. So, but as a generic, if they've expired and there's no balance, you've got no right to keep that data. If a business has gone bankrupt and you're a B2B, there's no right to keep that data. And again, unless they owe you money or you owe them money, in which case, you might need to sort of keep that going until it's legally been resolved. But in either case, you can't contact them for marketing or sales promotions, which, ethically we wouldn't anyway. So,
Just a question and answer. Somebody's asked, what if customer information is written and stored in a folder?
So is this, I'm assuming this is like, again, like a paper example, and a kind of folder, a file, an A4 lever archer type folder. I'm assuming that's the case. You still are responsible for making sure that data is safe, it's stored, it's unpenetrable. If you're leaving confidential information, if you've literally got, firstly, I would highly encourage you digitalize it anyway, because you then leave out the prospect of, and heaven forbid, touch wood, none of us are going to ever be burgled or anything. But if something goes missing, or you have to move house, you're going to be liable for that displacement of that information. So in that case, and hopefully that was the kind of question. Apologies if it wasn't the physical lever archer type folder. But if that is the question, you're still governed by these rules and regulations. You still are responsible for only keeping that record, that piece of paper, in your folder for X number of years, after which you have to shred it, you have to dispose of it. You're no longer legally allowed to sort of keep hold of that information. So, don't lose it, don't break it, don't damage it, don't put it in a physically unsafe environment. Make sure you, from your perspective, you keep it as secure as possible. Granted, I think, we will have scenarios where we do keep our data in lever archer folders. That's not saying we can't, but I would personally make a recommendation: try to digitalize it, try to almost put it on the cloud, where it's with a really secure provider who has got a robust GDPR GDPR compliant storage system. And, you know, I'm not saying it's about passing the buck, but you're diminishing your liability, and you know, you're putting it into a company who is a bit more credible. They will be in the spotlight a bit more than you already. So if they haven't already, pretty soon they will be as compliant as you can be, and you know, they will be scrutinized a lot more. You know, it is a sad or good thing, I don't know. You know, larger businesses are an easier sort of source of finding, you know, simply by their nature. However, don't be complacent and think you won't be caught up. Some scenarios I've come across, if you're a part of a food chain of businesses where someone has been impacted, so you know, you're either a customer, you're a supplier, you're the you know, the actual service provider, and someone in that chain has been impacted, you know, when you're going through that audit trail and you're going back through the trace of where that data has been acquired, if your name is then mentioned, you are then part of that unfortunate investigation. And this is where, honestly, privacy by design, master these 6 principles, and you should be okay. You know, I would even say, you know, don't be. I think, from my perspective, I would, you know, like I said, we've built a preference center, which is the best way to have a consent-driven database. So a preference center is where literally you have a series, you know, the customer logs in, they have a series of tick boxes, they let you know exactly what they're interested in, what they're not interested in, and you know, they come in every now and again, and they'll you know, keep that updated, get that then kind of signed off by a solicitor, get them to kind of audit and check it, and then nail your brand on that, and actually use that legal activity as a marketing activity to say, you know, our information has been validated, has been verified by you know, this solicitor. And I'm sure, you know, within Enterprise for All, there will be you know, within the network, there will be solicitors out there who would probably offer this kind of service at a really good rate, maybe at scale. But you know, work with a good data company, and you know, a legal company to kind of get this kind of robust and signed off. So that's kind of my recommendation in terms of the storage side of things. So just a quick look at time. So in terms of another kind of scenario, so again, 6 principles. Let's say now you've got a small telesales team, or maybe it's you single-handedly, you know, you're a sole trader, and you know, you're literally, and there's nothing wrong with this. You know, you're picking up the phone and you're contacting your customers. In terms of relevance, again, you know, be fair, lawful, and transparent. Again, there's a specific article in part of the GDPR where information to be provided where the personal data has been collected from the data subject. But what we need to be clear about is when the customer has signed up for your service, or has bought a product off you, or you know, has transacted or communicated with you, you know, they specifically knew that they would then receive some kind of a call, a telesales call, you know, later down the line to maybe upsell or maybe cross-sell something. So as long as you've got that kind of documented, you've got that as proof. So coming back to the kind of preference center example, you know, you could literally have, you know, we're interested in, you know, getting, you know, information about XYZ, and you know, so that's kind of down the left, and then across the top you've got the actual channel that they're interested in receiving that communication for. So email, telesales, or SMS, for example, it's a bit of a crude example, but literally it's spelt out, and then in your backend database, every time they kind of toggle any of those consent boxes, it captures an updated date, and you always go off the most updated opt-in or consented version of that particular customer. So the next point within telesales is be fair, lawful, and transparent. So lawful could be consent for a specific purpose. It could be a contractual necessity, or there could be a legitimate interest. So consent for a specific purpose is straightforward. I, as a customer, have given you permission to contact me about your skin services, and you can contact me by email, for example, but not by telephone. Contractual necessity, again, that's absolutely fine. So if you have to send out an invoice statement by email every month to show kind of billing activity, that's a necessity. You've got no issue with GDPR. Controller's legitimate interest. So this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, where there is something called legitimate interest, which you might have heard of. And a lot of businesses in the initial days of GDPR thought, we're covered by legitimate interest. And the reason why they thought that as well is direct marketing is actually a legitimate interest. It's actually, in the interest of, I'll just read out the second point. It's a balance between the data subject's fundamental rights of knowing what they've opted in for and actually giving you the physical consent, and the freedom and the need to direct marketing to them. So, their rights to know what data we hold, how we will use it, do they have a say in this versus our need for sort of direct marketing. So the legitimate interest could be that, if we have a better product at a cheaper price, then there's potentially a legitimate interest in ensuring that that customer receives this kind of campaign, this information, because it's cost saving. So there's a balancing act. If you do both, whereby you do kind of email them about legitimate sort of campaigns, but at the same time you've also got them fully opted in, you can safeguard it on both. There's no reason to kind of argue, or you've got all your bases covered. However, if you're kind of you sold them a laptop and now you're potentially selling them a massive screen to use as a second screen, it gets ambiguous if that's legitimate interest, because for me, you're potentially cross-selling them something else, and trying to generate revenue in another SKU, in another item within your business. So it could be interpreted, but if you're covered by the content side of things, then you've got nothing to worry about at all. And even then, you've got to make sure safeguards are in place. So data minimization, opt-out options, etc., encryption. So these are attributes that we need to be sort of considering, even if we go down the route of legitimate interest. Like I said, the issue is it's not a defined there's not a defined process for the legitimate interest. So err on the side of caution at all times. And just to reiterate, consent for kind of specific purposes, freely, specifically informed, and unambiguously indicating by statement or affirmative action, signifying agreement to processing of the personal data. Just spell it out. Just spell it out to them. Give them control, give them transparency, give them a clear notification, give them proof that that their consent has been given. So, there's kind of 4 pillars within the consent-driven model, and if you kind of, a privacy, a preference center is kind of the solution here, really, where you've got a section within your website where a customer can log in, and they can actually control what they've actually consented for. They get an email once they opt in, once they opt out, to confirm that they have done this. Do they really want to opt out of anything? Or thank you for opting in. We value your service, and we'll ensure you get the top quality information that our customers deserve. So there's kind of four pillars within the content driven model. So just to be wary of. And still within this, your data's got to be accurate and necessarily up to date. So comply with customers if any details aren't accurate. So if they say to you, don't call me on my mobile anymore, call me on my landline, and they give you the landline number, you overwrite what was in the mobile number section. If someone says, don't call me ever again, they have now, they've now physically opted out of receiving telephone calls off you. You've got to kind of make sure that happens. But again, let's flip it upside down and say, at the end of the call, let's say you've kind of done a telesales call, and hopefully you've got a sale. Maybe you haven't. Regardless, at the end, just say, dear sir, madam, you've got sort of a quick minute or two, kind of just run through some of your personal detail that we currently hold, and hopefully you kind of use that at the start potentially as a security measure. But if not, it's not a problem. You've definitely know this customer is legitimate. You can actually run through. Are you still at this address? Is this your best number to get you on? Are you still on this email address? And you can actually run through what you've currently hold about that customer to just confirm some of that detail, which again is going to save you a bit of money if that data becomes out of date or redundant later down the line, and you end up getting loads of bounced emails or a lot of gone away mail post, or you end up kind of ringing a dead number. So it's going to save you a lot of time and effort in due course. And then the last kind of scenario is kind of email, and then after this we'll kind of hit the Q&A. So in terms of email, which I would probably think the majority of us use, we do some form of email marketing. So I've hopefully saved the best to last. So again, 6 principles: fair, lawful, transparent, collect, specified purpose, adequate, don't lose it, identifiable as long as necessary, and keep it accurate. So first and foremost, we make sure the data subject consented to what we're marketing to them. So again, I'm selling you, bottles of water. You have, consented to me actually contacting you about this. What work backwards? What do we, what do we currently market? And ensure the data subject knew. So this could be where we've already got the data, so we potentially didn't capture it in a way which could be GDPR compliant. Can we actually, if we were to reverse engineer it and we were to look at what we currently hold, either in conversation, either in email, however we had that dialogue with that customer, did they know we would potentially be contacting them about this? If not, you've got to again make a bit of a call and say, this customer isn't really opted in which case, we need to start thinking about actually opting them out, and maybe just send them an email to say, because we haven't received any explicit information that you do want to receive email newsletters, email information from us, we've opted you out provisionally, but do let us know if your circumstances change. Again, you can utilize this as a benefit from a perceived negative. Again, no issues with account statements. If you have to regularly send a customer account information, then do so. That is not affected at all. So now let's say you're using, so this crucial, again, simplistically, there's one of two ways you could do an email campaign. One is you use an email platform. So whether that's Outlook, whether that's a paid for email send product that you run from your desktop. So you put in a CSV and you create your template and you churn it out, and you use an API to send out your emails, or you use an online service like MailChimp, for example. So again, you as the data controller need to ensure the platform is secure, it's stable, and it's encrypted. You know, you've got to go through these measures. You know, can someone hack in to your form of email? MailChimp's pretty good in terms of GDPR compliance. You know, without sort of giving specific recommendations, they are pretty good, and I think they give you a free send volume of up to 2,000. And they're pretty good as well at sussing out if you've got a redundant list of emails. So if your list hasn't been transactional or responsive to you, they can actually suss out that this customer, this particular email address hasn't been used or operational for a long time now. And why is this platform using, why is this customer using this? So, you know, they're pretty good. So providing your list is really relevant, efficient, responsive, you know, feel free to use a platform like that. They have got a specific section on GDPR as well on the particular website. So, you know, again, the onus is on you to make sure you kind of tick these boxes, but you can then diminish some liability by you know, that platform picking up the baton. But you've got to ensure they are as kind of legitimate and compliant as possible.